Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here, audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. And if you're watching this as a video, you probably already see me smiling. And that is because this interview is just one of my favorite conversations ever. And I am so excited to bring it to you today. My guest today is Dr. Tori Olds, who is a clinical psychologist and educator who also educates other therapists and has a wonderful YouTube channel that I will be linking to in the video description and the podcast description. So definitely check it out. The reason Tori is here is to discuss something called memory reconsolidation. Now, if you're here on my channel, chances are you want to know how to change your brain. Whether you're dealing with medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms like PPPD, MDDS, or vestibular migraine, or you're dealing with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, long COVID, or any other set of symptoms that doesn't seem to be explained by a medical reason and seems to have to do with a neural circuit issue in the brain. In any of these cases, what you're here to learn through my channel is how to unlearn those issues. In other words, how to change your brain. And memory reconsolidation describes exactly this process. Memory reconsolidation is a field of study in neuroscience and psychology that explains step by step how our brain unlearns emotional or implicit learnings. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in this interview, and how it can then make new learnings leading to recovery and transformative change. Equally applicable, not just to mental health issues, but also to physical symptoms like yours that are the result of a neural circuit problem. And we go deep into this process today. This, again, I think is one of the most useful interviews I've ever done because it provides a unifying framework that explains why all of the techniques we talk about on this channel work. And I think you're going to learn a lot here, as well as gain some tips for how to DIY or do it yourself with some of this process, as well as some information on what other resources might be helpful to you if you think you need guidance through this process. Again, so privileged to bring you this conversation. As always, looking forward so much to your comments and questions. Drop them below if you're on YouTube, or head on over to YouTube if you're listening to this as a podcast. Join the conversation. And you can like, share, subscribe to my channel. These things really help me reach more people. Or if you're listening to this as a podcast, please follow it. That also helps me reach more people. All right, let's get right to the conversation with Tori and get ready to learn how to change your brain. All right, Tori, thank you for agreeing to come on. Welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm so excited to talk and learn from you too as well, Uni. It's nice to meet you.
Well, it's a fateful meeting, I think, of our two fields because there's such a strong intersection between what you do and what I do. And I am so excited to share your perspective with people listening to my podcast, watching my channel, because so many of the things we talk about actually are in the realm of memory reconsolidation.
Yeah.
We just don't frame it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ahead of myself. So before I start going off into the weeds, why don't we start by having you just tell people a little bit about yourself and also how you became interested in this idea of transformative change.
Okay, yeah. So again, my name's Tori Olds. And I became interested in psychology because both my parents are psychologists. So I was raised, and they're wonderful. They love what they do. They had a lot of people coming in that were these like wonderful therapists inventing models to stay at our house. And there's always a lot of rich conversation about psychology growing up. And both my husband and I, and my sister, we're all her partner, we're all therapists. So it's my passion. It's definitely more than a job, as it is for many therapists. It's like a calling. It feels like, it's part of who you are. And I'm very lucky. When I was in the 90s, when I was in high school, my mom actually went away from more analytic ways of working toward more experiential ways of working through a group form of therapy that most people haven't heard of. But it was very in the body. The whole form of therapy, a system-centered therapy, was to be in the moment to not storytell about things going on outside of group, but to really notice what one was feeling in the moment in the body, and then explore that with people who are feeling something similarly. So whoever is feeling sad, they take a little moment to say, okay, whoever's having that experience, like really explore it together, get to the bottom of it, open up some space around it. Like, and when you're doing that in a way where there's that kind of connectedness, it feels so safe and it's actually very powerful. So I started learning about emotion very early because of that. The woman who invented that model was a grandmother figure to me. And it was like, feel your feelings. And I was sort of like an evangelic, even what is it, evangelist for that.
Yes. Oh boy, are you in good company on this channel? Oh my
I
goodness.
loved it.
Yes.
And, when I was in college, I was doing, getting people to come do trainings for the students. Like, we have to feel. And anyway, so that was a lovely early learning for me. That's helped me so tremendously in my life. But it also got me interested in the experiential therapy movement, which is a whole movement in our field really since 2000, last 20 years or so. The therapies were even started being invented before that, but it's the last 20 years that people started noticing and realizing there's this whole new branch of therapy. And like, let's think about what's happening in the brain. And neuroscientists have gotten into that conversation, and neuroscientists tend to love experiential therapies because they really map with how the brain actually changes. And so there's been this real emergence, this kind of blossoming in our field, renaissance in our field. Trainings have gotten super exciting. It's still not what we learn in grad school. So a lot of therapists still aren't aware of it because they just come out of
Right.
grad school. So that's an interesting thing. And there's politics behind that and blah, blah, blah. But for actually out in the world, what therapists tend to be excited about are these new experiential approaches. Ones I think I was looking at your channel. I saw you had an AEDP, John Frederick, I can't remember his name, but I love him.
Yes, John Frederick. Yes, Ron Frederickson.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's who it was. Yes. Okay.
Yep.
And other people on the channel. It's great. I mean, IFS, I think you may have talked about. So there's so many wonderful somatic experiencing I have training in. So I just started getting training in as many experiential models as I could. And they each have something really powerful to offer. They have an insight about how the mind works. And there's always a kind of a shared insight across all experiential models, but they get there a certain way. They either do it through emotion or through the body or through the parts, or there's the kind of different ways in. But ultimately, what it seems to be the case is that what makes experiential techniques so interesting is that instead of trying to override our symptoms and teach us coping skills, they try to get to the root cause of the symptom. And I suppose we'll be talking about this like ad nauseum. So maybe I won't even go into describing what I mean by that. But I'll just say I got interested in that.
Because why wouldn't you?
What?
Like,
Say that?
because why wouldn't you? Who wouldn't
Yeah.
want to actually
Yeah.
eliminate the symptom versus just kind of, coping with the symptom?
Yes. And it was a friend of mine, Julianne Taylor Shore, who, if you don't know her work, she also does great work. She had studied originally with Daniel Siegel, and she's just geeked out about the brain. So she knows just about as much as anyone about how the brain works with trauma therapy specifically. She's amazing. But she was the one that kind of, began to set the seed for me of even knowing that there was something called memory consolidation. And then that led me to meet a man named Bruce Ecker, not that many years ago, maybe 6 or 7, I can't remember. Maybe even less than that. But in the last few years, we've been co-leading a group together, and I've really dived into him being my mentor. And he's the main one who's been making the link between memory consolidation and transformational change. And he has a wonderful book on that called Unlocking the Emotional Brain, which I recommend for anyone. Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll get into that.
Dense read, though. Dense read. So I'm hoping to give just the average layperson
let's do the cliff
a
notes.
glimpse into actual meat of that book without them needing to read through it. It's a fabulous read, but it is also quite a read. But that's one of the reasons we're talking now, because I have read both versions of it. I just read the updated one too, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
So can you say a word about something you just referenced a few moments ago? You said experiential therapy maps onto how the brain works. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I guess when you're thinking about how the brain works, there's 2 questions. One would be understanding why we struggle, and you can look at that from a brain perspective. And then also understanding the healing process, which you can look at from a brain perspective. And I think both of those, the experiential theory of that seems to be more scientifically, and science always changes. So I don't want to say it's right or it is the absolute thing, of course, especially with the brain. But in terms of the most cutting edge version of brain understanding we have to date, and also, honestly, just clinical wisdom, I have to say, yes, we can talk about the science, but when you really start doing this work, it's as clear as day. It's right there that we have an unconscious mind and blah, 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 which that sounds weird, but it really just means implicit memory, which we can talk about. But there's more going on under the surface than we're conscious of. That seems really true. And if you think about, okay, what causes our suffering then? The experiential therapy understanding of that is that there's something we learned to expect, like danger. Like we learn to expect when dangers are going to come or what's dangerous, what's safe. That's held more, like you could even say in the amygdala, like deeper in the brain, as well as learnings around how to stay safe or protect ourselves or get our needs.
Yes. Yes.
So they're just, and when I say learnings, the image I have, I don't know if this is helpful or gets too sciencey for people, but because some people like more metaphors for that, some people like more like sciencey ways of describing that. But it really is a neural network. So a neural network is just a pattern of neural firing that's gotten kind of ingrained, you could say.
A circuit, a
It's a
little
circuit.
circuit. Brain.
It's
Yeah.
it's a connection. And that's just how all memory is. It's like, it just connects things, associates something with something else to like, so that they can be remembered, like the melody of the song with the lyrics of the song, like they just get connected so that I can remember the song, right? So in a similar way, but now not everything we remember is or learn to know about is psychologically valenced. Like I have a neural network that knows what an apple is, right? And is like, oh, this shape, like size, color, oh, that's probably an apple. And it might even change my physiology to get ready to eat it. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to eat it. And my body's getting ready to eat it, right? So that's just like, it's not very psychological, to have that neural network. But some neural networks are incredibly psychologically valenced. Ones that have to do with how to stay safe, how to stay loved. If like we're in a family that you're not supposed to do X, Y, and Z, or you get rejected or shamed, or you make mom feel overwhelmed and then she's depressed. It's like we learn like, oh, something's off limits. Usually our emotions, which I know you've talked about this channel, but there could be many versions of this, but we've learned something is dangerous. And so now if it's dangerous, we also have to learn within that. And that neural network will just, of course, evolution, would say we need to learn some way of protecting ourselves.
Absolutely. Yep. And as you're describing this, I'm sure all the light bulbs are going off for people listening, because whether we're describing a mental health type symptom or a physical symptom that was learned because of for example, traumatic vestibular event, our brains connect, they associate a particular stimulus or a particular feeling
Yes.
or a particular sensation with a
Yes.
particular strategy to cope with or deal with or get rid of it. And
Yes.
that's what so much of what traps people in chronic physical symptoms when they're medically unexplained, of course. When
Yeah.
there's a medical problem, it's a little bit different. But
Yeah.
for most of the people watching my channel, the symptoms don't have a medical cause. They are a neural circuit issue.
Right. So they're just as real, but they're just developed a different way.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So
Right.
perceptions are exactly the same as they would be if someone had a physical tumor on a nerve,
Yeah.
but they are the result of a
Development.
circuitry error.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So what you're saying then is, since experiential therapies recognize that this is actually the genesis of symptoms in many cases, that experiential therapy also has a way of dealing with these circuits in a way that's different from, say, more conventional or
CBT.
cognitive focused therapies.
Right. It's so funny because I think to a degree we knew this before we knew the brain science. At least there were certain therapists that would talk about having a corrective emotional experience, or we just see
Yes.
randomly, oh, there's such a thing as a therapeutic breakthrough. This person just transformed overnight. Like, how did that? But we didn't really understand. And maybe we try to guess, like, okay, what did we do to create that? Like, and then we'd like look at like, well, what did we do in the last session before that breakthrough? And people
Right.
are really trying to figure it out, of course. But that's it's a different working assumption. Because before, let me just go to the science way of saying this, all these learnings are held in implicit memory. And until 20 years ago, we thought once something was, you could say, conditioned, it was the same idea as conditioned, a fear response conditioned, for instance. Once is imprinted in implicit memory like that, you couldn't change that neural network.
Right. So,
Remote.
for example,
Yeah.
someone had a really bad episode of BPPV, which is a type of vestibular issue, and they developed this conditioned fear response
That's it.
that was just it. Anytime they had that kind of symptom of vertigo or spinning sensation, that neural network would light back up, and that's it.
Yes.
And so
That's it.
the best we could hope for would be to create a competing
Yes.
coping way of
Yes.
working with that network. Is that
That's
accurate?
exactly right. We thought, because originally this was like teaching mice to fear a bell in a lab, and it's going to bring shock. And so they really analyzed like all of this kind of fear conditioned things. And then they said, okay, well, I guess since we can't really ever change that knowing, we can try to do extinction training, which is kind of effective. We can teach, basically we can try to develop new neural networks that know something else and then really strengthen those in
Mhm.
hopes that they'll override and be more powerful than the original learning. And
Yes.
that can work for a little bit. That's what extinction's based on. That can like kind of be helpful. The only problem is under stress or more fear, then the original knowing can pop back up.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're kind of speaking now to the difference between what y I don't know if you've used these words,
Mhm.
but in the literature, they're often referred to as transformative versus counteractive
Yes.
change. I think you did mention that.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Mhm.
so transformative change is the network is gone. It's
Right.
not gonna it can't be reactivated because it's just not there anymore. Whereas
Exactly.
this counteractive change would be, I've found alternative ways of dealing with this, but under stress, it can pop back up again.
That's right. Because what I've learned to do is counteract, not dissolve the network.
Mhm.
And most forms of therapy are based on that, and not just for these kinds of symptoms we're talking about today, but for anxiety, like, oh, you're anxious. Okay, we'll teach you anxiety, take a breath, calm down, how to get out of that state once triggered. If it's anger, okay, how to like know your anger, like calm yourself down or think positively, or if you're thinking irrationally, think something rational. It's kind of intuitive. It's like you have the thing, try to do the opposite thing and learn it.
Right.
And
Right.
like
Right, right, right.
the opposite.
Yeah,
If you're depressed,
and
just
there's
get out of bed.
right, and there's certainly a place for that
There's a place for that. Yeah.
right? There's a place for that. So then what in your view is the place for this transformative change? Like, maybe you can use the example that you just gave of anxiety. What would how would that look different with a transformative change, and why would we want that instead of a counteractive change?
Yeah. I mean, if you just think of anxiety as like, oh, I'm just like genetically prone to anxiety, or it's just this thing, which there are people. I think genetics always plays a role in everything.
Of course.
But if you only think of it as a symptom, then like, oh, I guess I don't know how to manage anxiety well, and I'll have to learn, and then I'm practicing. Um, you just keep having to do it again and again and again and again. It becomes this I have to always be regulating. But if you ask, why am I anxious? I mean, it's not that crazy of a jump to ask that question. Like, so what's making me anxious? And then, I know CBT asks that a little bit. They think it's a thought. But here's the difference. And I think this is really true. It's possible a conscious thought could be, at the very least, exacerbating our anxiety.
Absolutely.
That's possible. But a lot of our thinking is unconscious. And I even use that word thinking because it's not just that we have feelings that are like deeper in our brain. Our deeper brain is kind of, I don't know if thinking is exactly the right word, but it has beliefs, it has knowings, it's analyzing information and making predictions about what things mean.
Yes.
You
Yes,
know, put it that way.
absolutely. Yes.
And those meanings, those understandings, those truths, those unconscious beliefs, imprints, however you want to call them, about what to expect and what this means, those aren't conscious thoughts, but they are knowings. But if we only look at what we're consciously thinking, we've barely skimmed the surface of what could be driving our emotional responses, our behavioral responses, even our thought responses. You know what I mean? Like if we're getting caught in a thought loop for some reason, well, why? Like we could just try to have a new thought, but it's like, well, why do I keep telling myself it's my fault? I mean, I could just try to
Right.
counteract it by being like, okay, it's not my fault, and it's like affirmations or something. But like, that's interesting. Why am I telling myself it's my fault? Where did I learn that? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Or where did I learn to do that? Or like, and so something like anxiety, I will say, could have many different causes. So it's not like, oh, I would know where that's likely to lead. It could be like there's so many things that can cause
Of
anxiety.
course.
It's one of the most generalized things. Like it's just our system's amped up because something's going on under the surface.
Right. Good
and
point.
there's really a funny thing how many things that could lead to. But I mean, I think of it as reverse engineering. Like you have the thing, you see the final product, and now you're reverse engineering. Like, how did we get there? Like, okay, a step before that was this, why that? And you just kind of like, you can kind of go backwards. And if you slow down and use some mindfulness, because we can talk about why you might want to use like mindfulness or some like do things that are different than just thinking about them. But there are some techniques, experiential techniques, that seem to help bring things up into awareness, so we can actually do the reverse engineering and say, like, what was under this? So we can go in the direction of describing that if you want. But there are ways we can actually begin to peer into through really slowing down, noticing what's happening, not thinking about it, but like, oh, right there is because something there. And that reminds me of this. And we can kind of like go backwards and begin to peer into like, oh, I think this association's there.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
um,
Yes.
And there's reasons we actually want to do that, which have to do with changing the neural network. So maybe we can go there soon, but
Ooh, okay, we're going there. We're heading there if everyone's, like, on the edge of their seats. But I know the question that's on everyone's mind right now, 'cause I think I think like them. So,
Mhm.
a lot of the people who end up dealing with a neural circuit issue, like some kind of physical symptom that's a neural circuit problem, are highly analytical. So they have probably asked this question many times, like,
Right.
"Why do I have anxiety?" And then they just kind of follow down the rabbit hole of all the fears, and they think they get to this core fear, and they've analyzed well, pardon the expression, but they've analyzed the crap out of it for
Yeah.
their entire lives. So how is what you're describing different from analyzing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's possible that they analyzed and got to something true. I don't know if they've really looked deeply. Um, but in therapy in general, we try to help clients get out of what you might think of as their thinking brain, or like be up here. We all know that kind of like you're going up
Mhm.
here. Because our thinking brain, our neocortex, is not just happens to not be the part of the brain that holds these implicit neural networks. So it
Yes.
just doesn't know the answer. It's brilliant. It's so brilliant. It's great at analyzing data, but it doesn't have the data. So
Right.
we can give it data and then it can understand the data, but it doesn't have the data. So that's why we use more experiential techniques to say, okay, let's just see what comes up if you have open awareness around this. And that sounds really mystical, but this is just me thinking. I don't know if anyone else said it like this exactly, but I think the reason that works is because we're dealing with memory. And think about how do you ever remember something? You just cue yourself in some way and then see what comes up. You know what I mean? Like you can't think the memory. You can't like analyze to figure out what the lyrics would be of that song or like what her face looks like or whatever. You just kind of like give yourself some cue
And then
to
boop.
begin and then it just
Yeah,
comes to begin to open the neural network. And
right.
that if you had never had that experience, that would sound mystical and weird. You know what I mean? So I just say it's like we're just using that similar kind of idea in a slightly different way.
Yes.
We're just saying, okay, I got it. And there's tricks to doing that, like parts work or like you might like if you had attention, you might just like say, okay, can you ask it? And that's sort of a metaphor a little bit. I mean, it's, like can you ask the tension, like, okay, what is it afraid? Or could you just sense into the tension? Like, what do you know there? Sometimes I'll say, what do you know about this? Not what do you think about that? And even that difference is helpful. Like, okay, so you're right there. But even notice it, like having my mindfulness on the tension itself is already beginning to stimulate that neural network that's causing the tension, right? So it helps me ask the right neural network, sort of, you could say, rather than just some idea about it. So like, okay,
Yes.
have the tension, focus on the tension, or the image that came to mind of a scary face, or a memory that came to mind, or whatever. Just like, stay with that kind of mindfully. And then, just like you would be mindful if you're trying to remember lyrics to a song, no different than that, stay with it kind of mindfully, and then just see what you know there. And we might, questions can help stimulate it. Like, what are you afraid would happen right there if you didn't tense? Or just what image comes of what you're expecting that what are you tensing against? And it's weird, but the mind can actually answer. It's not like in the old Freudian days when we thought like it's unconscious because it's so suppressed. I mean, yes, we can suppress things. We can have neural networks whose job it is to suppress things. That's a weird thing. So yes, so sometimes it is like we don't want to look there, and that's why we're not looking. But also, these things are just wired to be non-conscious. It's like we in order to be efficient, like I have like a part of my brain that knows to put my seatbelt on when I get in the car, and I literally don't have to think about it. I've just learned
Right.
it's dangerous to drive without a seatbelt. I automatically put it on. That's why those neural networks are there to like so I can focus on something else, like making sure my kids' seatbelts are on, right? Whatever. I
Right.
can just be making, I can use my intelligence for something else. This is automated. But that doesn't mean I can't slow down and notice I'm doing it, and be like, oh yeah. Or like I said, especially if I'm doing it in a way that creates pain, like I clip myself, like, oh wait, what's going on? How can I shift? Like, why was it? So it's not that impossible to make these things conscious. It just takes getting out of our thinking brain, slowing down, giving some kind of cue, creating safety. Because yes, the places where we do weirder psychological stuff is probably to avoid intense pain. Like that's the reason that it got this frantic whole system or pattern in the place is because something was really painful.
Yes.
So it probably will take a lot of safety also. So we're kind of
Yes.
talking about two different things. You have to ask the right part of the mind by slowing down, being mindful, using more evocative ways of bringing it up, right? Reminding the system while doing a lot to create safety.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of, that's the, like a great therapist, that's their job. It's like to ask questions in a way that triggers the right part of the mind, but also be attuned to the client's inner system so they go at the right pace. They help them feel resourced, which, by the way, you could use some of those managing skills that CBT does or whatever
To
to resource
resource.
it.
Mhm.
So it's like you're back out. Like, okay, now take a breath. Like, pull back from it. Like if you need to regulate right now using all your skills because we want to. Okay, fine. So that's part of creating safety. But it's not just okay. There, great. You're better. It's like we're using those skills. We're using even mindfulness or taking a breath to create the bandwidth that then we can allow things that were felt too scary a moment ago to look at to come into awareness.
Yes. So, okay. I want to frame this for everyone listening, and Tori, I think you'll find this fascinating. So, one of the things that we see as a pattern among people with neural circuit dizziness and other medically unexplained chronic symptoms is what we tend to call personality traits. Okay, I don't think of traits as
Yeah.
these things as traits. I think of them more as strategies because they're not immutable and
Yeah.
they seem to be protective in nature. They were developed as a coping strategy. And I I think what we're getting at here is we're trying I at least I as a practitioner think one of my jobs is to answer this question. If two people have the same symptom
Yeah.
and only one of them ends up with chronic symptoms as the result of this initial symptom event, why? Why that person? Is it
Yeah.
just that person's just genetically unlucky? I mean, as you said, biology exists, so it's always possible. But more often than not, it has to do with the unconscious ways or the neural circuit ways in which the brain is responding to the symptoms. And it ends up, again, because these associations, these neural networks in there that we were describing they already exist. There are networks that over respond to fear or that over respond to discomfort with by immediately taking blame and shame or by
It's so
immediately
good for saying it. Keep
becoming a
going.
perfectionist. Yeah, exactly, right? So what you're saying is that if we what people often will start with is saying, "Well, I have fear of symptoms. That's why I'm anxious." And for sure,
Sure.
fear of symptoms
Sure.
is like for sure you're scared of them, that they're not comfortable. But why is your nervous system responding and perpetuating this over response of fear to the symptoms that's keeping symptoms going? It's probably not because you're just being dumb and being scared in a way that
Yeah.
someone else isn't. It's because there are some networks, there are some learned strategies that your
Right.
brain is using in response to this symptom, and we need to
Yes.
know what those are.
Yes, I think that's really well said. Thank you for, I mean, you said that so much better than I could have, but I think what I hear you saying is like learnings we already have because we're usually adults maybe or
We're
have
usually
had some
adults.
weird
Yes. Oh,
experiences or,
sure.
it's not like but so we already have learnings. And then as the new experience of this crazy new symptom is like being filtered through those old learnings, it's going to
Exactly.
influence the new learnings and how
Exactly.
we integrate it and process the experience and make sense of the experience and manage experience and our level of freak out
Exactly.
around that experience and all those things. I don't know if everything comes back to attachment, but just from an
I
attachment
love that you started a sentence that way. I just have to say that.
yes, right. But a lot of it does.
Yeah.
And part of my saying, maybe not everything always comes back to attachment. Attachment is so powerful, and there's other things, forces in life. You know what I mean? And
Sure,
that
sure.
like but yes, I think let's play with the attachment arena for a second. Like for me, what attachment is it builds in a security. I have the resource to face a bump in the road so I can stay reasonably calm in the face of that bump in the road. Gives us a core hope that it's going to pass. Literally, when a child runs to a parent, something's upsetting, and they help metabolize it with them. They reassure them it's okay. They help them notice that even their feelings are okay and are going to go somewhere good because they'll resolve. Like there's like a core security or hope, or like, okay, things can be bad, but they'll be better the next second, kind of gets ingrained in a way. There's a lot that gets ingrained. There's also like, I'm not alone in this world. I mean, there's a lot of hopeful things that get ingrained that allow us to move through bumps in the road or hard experiences, and especially hard experiences in our body, because that's usually when kids run to their parents, like, I'm off, and the parent says, that's okay, basically. Like, we can get watch, see how it passes. You can trust it to pass. I'm going to help it to pass by holding you. And then, okay, now we're less scared of the sensations from our body. In fact, we think they're good things because they bring resource and love and compassion, and they help us metabolize things and make sense of things. And so attachment largely is really like deeply influencing how we live in our bodies. I mean, you could say our emotions. That's what attachment people talked a lot about, emotions, but it's just our bodies, like all the sensations and disturbances and fear reactions and all those things in our bodies as they come up. Like, do we have a basic template that says, this will be helpful to me and probably go somewhere well, good, and even if it's a glitch, it'll resolve and it's fine, versus like, oh God, I'm going to be cycling this for hours, which is what happens to children who are neglected.
Yep. And let's also frame this. I mean, of course, as a psychotherapist, I'm sure you work with people disproportionately who've experienced trauma, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be trauma for there to be some learnings here that create this lens through which we interpret symptoms or sensations when they happen. And they're not necessarily the kinds of experiences that live in our narrative memory. So they're not like, okay, on Sunday, June 5th,
Oh.
I had this experience when I was 5. It can be just, we have a deep core felt sense of something being true that is the lens. It's the lens through which we see everything. So then when we have an experience like dizziness, we can't interpret it any other way. We have to see it through this lens because it's our lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that you're going to find on a checklist or on an ACE score. It's not necessarily, it's
Right. That's
something
right.
that's going to show up for someone who has no trauma. It's not necessarily
It
something that only comes from trauma.
looks from the outside like everything was great. And even in their
Absolutely.
narrative, it might feel like
Yeah,
everything was great. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So coming back to this idea then of experiential therapy, this is the great strength that it has, because it's not looking at people as collections of histories or stories, although stories matter too. Um, it's it investigates some of those felt sense type learnings, these emotional learnings, these implicit memory learnings. I'm just using all the different terms for
Yeah.
people to
Yes.
reconcile all of them.
Exactly.
Um, and investigate which ones might be affecting their lens, the lens through which they're seeing this experience.
Right. Right. Which one is triggering? We start with the symptom and go backwards to see there
Got it.
must be some association or learning under this.
Okay, and so why do we do this? But why would we bother?
Yes. This is a memory consolidation. Yay.
Yeah, because we're nerds and we wanna know how everything works, but also because it
Yeah.
does something good.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, the point isn't just the insight. I mean, having insight is sometimes, even when we just become aware of the neural network, like we become aware of what it's based on, that in itself can be very relieving for people because
sure.
it can reduce shame. Like, oh my God, I wasn't crazy. There really was something under this. Like, I get it now. I'm not deficient. Like, that makes so much sense. So that's a lovely place, but it's actually not the goal. Like in the olden days, we sometimes had insight was the goal. This is it. It's not the final goal. And that comes back to memory reconsolidation and what we discovered about how it works. So basically what we learned is that the brain has an innate, endogenous, like evolved in mechanism. It makes sense that it would actually, to update old emotional imprints. Again, we didn't know that until about early 2000s. And basically there's not a lot of requirement. There's basically 2 or 3 main requirements I can maybe mention here. The first one is that you need electricity running down that neural network. You need to be activated. You need to be online. If it's lying dormant, which most of our networks are most of the time, like, like my network that's scared of spiders is only be online when I see a spider, it's like, so it needs to be someone online, electricity flowing down it, while at the same time, our mind is witnessing information that directly disconfirms, kind of decisively, but subjectively, like it feels true, like, wait, that can't, disconfirms or proves to be false, I guess you could say, whatever prediction this neural network is launching. Whether it's prediction of danger or prediction of this is the only way to protect myself or whatever the prediction aspect of that prediction, if something comes on that's like, okay, my brain's actively predicting this to be true when this neural network's firing, but I see evidence that shows actually that can't be true, at least not in the exact way this neural network predicts. It doesn't even have to be a complete mismatch. It could just be like, it's not quite what I predict. That's enough to create what's called a mismatch experience. Those things don't match. And that experience, that assessment by the brain, whoa, I'm predicting two things that don't match, unlocks the proteins that hold the neural network in place. So the network becomes what's called labile, open for change, for about the next 5 hours. It's a kind of amazing because if as it's labile, you then introduce that information again, like give it new information, the change actually only takes 2 or 3 seconds, which is sort of amazing. It's like the network can totally reorganize in 2 or 3 seconds. Now, I will say it takes a lot of work to get it up, to set up that moment for that breakthrough. It's not like it's just like easy to do. And there's also, we give the easy picture, but of course there's all sorts of technical parts of this, including making it feel safe and blah, blah, blah. Because that's only the third thing I would like to mention that doesn't always get mentioned is you do have to feel relatively safe for for the mismatch to be detected.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If your brain is preoccupied with keeping you alive, then it's not going to really care about updating old.
Yeah, it's not going to. Yeah, it's not gonna, right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So that is the trick, and we kind of always knew that as therapists that was a trick. How do we get people in touch with their deeper material and keep them regulated at the same time? We knew already some magical things that we didn't know how to exactly direct it with ultimate reliability, but we knew like if we get in touch with stuff and for whatever reason feel safe enough to finally let myself know that or say that or feel that, like we knew that was like a really interesting zone for different changes to happen. And we also knew it's hard. If you're asking things to emerge, it can be destabilizing for people. It can be scary. It can be, and so all these different systems, whether it's doing it through parts or whether it's doing it through language, that's coherence therapy. I think you were saying maybe we could talk a little bit about how they do it more through language, which more intellectual people often like. But there's different ways to kind of try to make it feel doable and safe at the same time. So you can witness the old truth, you can witness some new truth, and hold them both with sort of like in a relatively stable state that's felt. Right. Literally, you have to have electricity running that neural network. So like, that's not intellectualizing about it.
Right. Right.
That does take some experiential technique.
And that answers the analyzing question, because then, as we were talking about before, if you're analyzing, you're not really experiencing.
You're not doing either of these. You're not not sending electricity down the neural network, and you're not giving a strong enough disconfirmation.
Right.
Because the brain doesn't listen to thoughts that much.
Right. And then also, what you're describing, I just want to clarify this for people. I think where people go wrong, and this is not saying that any system of therapy that does this is bad or wrong, but generally people's instinct is, okay, I have something that contradicts that knowledge that you have. Let me tell you about it, and we should try to disprove it. So what you're talking about is a juxtaposition. So having both experiences feel really true at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So the trick here, and I think this is really what gets hard. It is not just finding this, the real felt sense, or reactivating or having electricity flow through that neural network that we're trying to break apart, but also when the electricity is activating it, resisting our own desire to make it stop or go away or try to intellectualize it or explain it away. That doesn't lead to this breaking apart or reconsolidation process. It has to be, I can tolerate and allow this to be activated while tolerating and allowing a completely opposite knowing to be activated. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So I want to clarify that, because I can see people trying to DIY this, and we'll talk about maybe some ideas about how to DIY this in a little bit. But before we go there to the actual process, I was wondering if you could touch on what coherence is, because that is a fundamental principle here. And I think it's such an important concept for people to understand.
Yeah, coherence is just the theory of what we've all, and it's really a fact, I think, but of what we've just described, which means that any symptom, well, not even symptom, any thought, feeling, impulse, whatever our mind produces, there's a coherent reason for that. There's a pathway it got to there, and that's why in coherence therapy, which is where we really are tracking the coherence of it, we don't even use the word disorder because we think the mind is ordered and it has a clear order. And it's not even a crazy order. It's just maybe based on old assumptions or learnings or things that were taught to you even culturally or through trauma or whatever. But that wasn't you being crazy to pick up that learning. It makes sense. You would associate this with danger, this with that, and maybe generalize it or whatever. That's all coherent. It all maps. It is all your mind just honestly trying to make sense of your experience with intelligence. I mean, sometimes these maps were developed when we were like 5, you know what I mean? Like, so they have the intelligence of a 5-year-old, but that's not craziness. It's not stupid. It's just the best that 5-year-old could explain why mom left, and maybe they blame themselves or, and then she's like, oh, okay, I guess that's true. But it's not, I think this is so important because it really depathologizes things that on the surface seem crazy. And it's core belief, like, absolutely, we're not crazy. Or trying to be lazy or deficient or morally deficient or, any of the shame-based things. It's like, there's a reason we just don't know it. It's just because our brain was wired, we evolved for most of it to be unconscious and to stick around because it doesn't want to have to relearn how to be human every day. That's like all just evolutionary stuff. It makes sense that we evolved that way. And then our own version of how that specifically evolved for us to manage our lives and stay okay also totally makes sense. We might not be conscious of how it makes sense, but we are trusting it makes sense even before we know.
Right.
So that's why when you're trained to be like, for instance, a coherence therapist, you are always listening for how does this make sense? What's underneath?
And I love that. I feel like people could just start to ask themselves that too.
I think
So,
they could.
I think we first have to get to the point where we can not do it in a blaming way, because I think that's sometimes uh, the way people will go with it. But how does this make sense? So when we're thinking about chronic dizziness or other symptoms, tinnitus or hyperacusis, or any of the other symptoms that I see regularly, taking the blame out of it and saying, there is some learning here that is causing my nervous system to react this way to it. Something about this actually does make sense. This is based on some prior learnings that I have. What about this makes sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I just think, again, that's the prerequisite to understanding anything else that we're about to talk about. So, okay. So now can we talk about the memory reconsolidation process itself? So we have already laid out the process of having this neural network. We have to light it up. We need some kind of disconfirming
Evidence.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how does this actually play out in memory reconsolidation?
I mean, it really just depends on the nature of that neural network, which, as Bruce likes to say, it's like as unique as a fingerprint. Like, you really have no idea how someone got to that symptom. You can say, like, under this symptom is always this. It's just like, you don't know. I mean, there may be common things, like maybe it is often a fear of emotion, but maybe it could be something else. So you're really staying curious and you're opening. And depending on the nature of the neural network, how you approach disconfirmation is going to vary. Like, if it's a shame-based neural network, there's a few options. You could do parts work where you see your child again, and sometimes from an adult perspective, we can realize, like, oh wait, I did have value in that moment. Like that the 5-year-old still living with me doesn't feel that way because that neural network learned, no, I don't. But sometimes seeing it from an adult perspective, like, wait a second, I was trying, or it wasn't my fault when this happened, or like, also there's a lot of ways that parts work can be used to both bring online the contents of the neural network, make it stay safe, and bring on disconfirmation. I think that's why a lot of people are into parts work, because it accomplishes a lot of the requirements in one fell swoop. Mm-hmm. However, parts work isn't for everybody. Like, some people, they just don't like it. I mean, I don't know why. It's just, who knows why, but some people just don't like it, and that's fine.
Some people have trouble being in their bodies in general.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I think some of that is probably the fault of us IFS people, is that sometimes we can present it as a little bit too, we're too precious about it. Like, no, we have these parts and they're super real and this is the only way to go. And, it's like, we're not soft and creative enough about how to employ it. It's like, look, you can imagine it or don't imagine it. Just take it really lightly. It's just asking a part. There's all sorts of flexible ways you can make it right to your system, but whatever. That's just how we humans are. We tend to, like, glorify things. But anyway, I will say that if you have never tried parts work, it's one of the most user-friendly ways of making this all a little bit simpler. So anyone should probably try it.
Can you just for people
Yeah.
who don't know, can you just briefly explain what
What
parts work
parts work?
means and which and if you have I know IFS or internal family systems is the predominant one, but there are other systems
There
that
are.
use it as well. So could you just say a bit? I'm gonna just defer to
Yeah.
your expertise on this for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are other ways I mean, I love Bonnie Badenoch's work. She has inner community work. There's interrelationship focusing. There's many ways. Basically, the idea of parts, a lot of therapies have, and it's real, but that's just a way of, it's not like necessarily the right language to use, but it's one intuitive way to talk about a neural network.
Okay.
Like,
So
yeah,
so a part so you could think of a part and for those of you who are listening who are very logical and scientific or scientifically oriented, you can think of a part as having different neural networks that have different learnings and different ways of responding to particular problems. So you may have a neural network that responds to cheesecake by saying, yes, please, more of that. And you may have a neural network that responds to cheesecake with, oh, you probably don't want to eat that. That's full of sugar.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, or I got food poisoning last time, and now I just automatically have a negative association. Like, that's the kind of neural.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, because if we say, a psychologically valence, thematically based neural network, it just doesn't roll off the tongue. So it's just
No, it doesn't.
and the same way that emotions. I mean, there's some really interesting science behind emotions. They're not as real in our brain as we think. They're not like this one thing gets triggered and this one part of my brain, and it's an emotion. I mean, it's a very complex thing happening in our brain that has to perceptual things but we just call it an emotion. We could call it something else. We call it emotion, and we're used to that. And so some people are saying, like, okay, that's great to explore feelings. We also probably need language to explore parts, and we need a word for it, which we could call a part. We call it ego state. We call it self state. We could call it a whatever, or neural network even, or a schema. As in coherence therapy, we use the word schema. It's a map of reality. Great, but there are some advantages to using parts language, which there are like 10 advantages come to mind that I'm like, oh my God, this is gonna get really too detailed of like all the things we're doing.
I
But
think, well, people watching this are actively in the process of learning why they might wanna work with someone who knows how to do this kind of
yeah,
work because they might be like, "I don't know how to do this on my own." So
yeah,
please go for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, when we call something a part, it brings on a certain kind of mindfulness. Like in the olden days, we used to say our observing ego, our
Yes,
observing
uh, observer mode is what I
observer mode.
often refer to it
Exactly.
as. Yeah.
Like if you just say, I am scared of this, you're just in it kind of. You say, I have a part that's scared of this. Now you have something to pay attention to. And it invites a reflective state. It also, by the way, invites a relational state,
Yes, yes.
right? And that changes. We won't go all the neurobiology, what that can change in the brain, but it creates safety. It just creates a different kind of integrated flow of information in the brain. It just makes us smarter and more aware and more able to take in context and blah, 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 the moment we are in a relational stance. So we've accomplished a couple things just by saying, instead of saying, I have this symptom, I'm anorexic, I'm insecure, whatever, we say, I have an insecure part. Then we have something. We've got a little distance from it because it's not all of who we are, it's just an aspect. So now I have my whole self that isn't just this, like, it's not all of me is insecure. I have an insecure part. Now I have some freedom to relate to it, to be curious about it, to maybe give it compassion, which maybe seems a little weird. Like, it's just a neural network. How can you give it? But it's just our mind is made to be relational. So it doesn't matter. We can relate to parts of our brain. I know it's weird, but it does
It's
create
hacking our biology though.
it's
I mean,
exactly,
biologically we are that that's that makes all sorts of good flexible things happen in the nervous system
exactly,
and in the
exactly.
chemistry of our brain. So,
That's a good way of
uh,
saying it. Yeah,
right? So if even if you don't believe you actually have like a little guy living in your
yeah,
head who's a
no,
neural
right.
network,
Yeah,
just you can you you don't have to feel like that's true to relate to this voice that you hear or this aspect of you in a compassionate way, knowing that that calms the nervous system, that reduces danger mode, that helps break cycles of fear and avoidance and anxiety around something and opens you up to change.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I think most people get the idea of self-compassion, like that we do have some relationship to ourselves. But when we divide it into parts, it also creates not only this relational stance, but also organizes things a little bit. Because the
Mhm.
truth is, we could have one part that believes this one thing and this other part that literally believes the opposite.
Yeah.
because the brain is a parallel processor. It just has parallel networks. They're not like always talking to each other. So that could be confusing. That's very confusing, right? Like, how can I love myself and hate myself? How do I desperately need my husband, but when I reject my husband, like, or whatever it is, like, how do I have these different pieces and they can flip between them? And it's very confusing. Sometimes they're both trying to talk to me at once. And then I'm in my therapy, like, well, this, but then they're this and this, but no, I'm that. And it's like, oh my gosh, it organizes things and produces a lot of clarity. Say, look, this is not so complicated. You're not crazy. You just have one part that learned. You better push yourself and try always, always to do your best. But then you had another part that has solved the problem that's about to lead to exhaustion. And now it just wants to stay in bed and wants to give up. Doesn't see, they're solving different problems. They're just neural networks designed to solve different problems. This one's designed to solve the problem created by this one of exhaustion. I think this system isn't working. I'm just going to convince myself, who even cares? I'm going to flip into like, I don't even care. I'm going to give up. But this part's weird, but that's weird because tomorrow I might be back in this like striving mode, And so it just helps us, like, I think when we organize it as parts that way, it's like there's a way that makes sense to people. Like, oh, okay, that I'm not crazy again. I'm not crazy. I just have these different learnings parts, and that helps me have compassion for them, and then I can relate to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I might have this knowledge. Okay, I know there's nothing wrong with my brain. Like, I have this rational part of me that just knows this is a neural circuit problem. I'm actually safe. These sensations are just a prediction error because sensations of dizziness that are not, that don't have a tissue damage origin are prediction errors also. It's just a prediction error. But at the same time, also have a part of me that's like terrified and is like, too bad. Like, I'm still not going and doing that thing. It's too triggering for me. I'm scared.
Yeah. And just, I mean, without even going so much science here, doesn't it just make sense that our mind, because it is a human thing, it is human consciousness we're dealing with, would just respond better to, tell me about why you're scared. And let's solve this together, versus, you chicken, like, just do it. I hate you. I mean? It's just not gonna, like, because that, it really believes it's dangerous. So if that neural network, so to speak, I'm sorry, over here, like, it is around like, this is really dangerous, and all the other information it senses coming from the rest of the brain is, no, that's stupid, we're just going to do it anyway. It's not going to like open for learning. It's just going to dig in harder.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So well said. And I think that is why people's first step in many cases, at least with chronic dizziness recovery, is to start to relate to the fear differently. It's not necessarily the only thing, because then they run into parts that can't relate to fear differently. They know something about fear. Often earlier emotional learnings, they've learned that emotions are bad or whatever it is. But learning to relate to the fear when it comes up differently seems like a prerequisite first step for people in recovery.
And just like you said, if that was difficult, then the very first place to go is, why is it so difficult?
Right. Not, oh, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah,
and
I'm not
I need to just
passionate enough or something.
Right. I know. Yes. I need to be really mean to myself to make myself more self-compassionate.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because even a inner critic or a part that wants to dismiss myself or tell myself, like, it really is doing its best. It really is based on honest learning. So we just get curious about that.
Right. So I'm tempted to have you walk us through an example of what this memory reconsolidation process looks like. But I also happen to know that on your channel, you have an entire session, a coherence therapy session. And by the way, guys, to be clear, coherence therapy is one of many modalities that use these principles that we're talking about today. It's not, these principles they're not universal in all modalities of therapy, but they're in many of the modalities that I talk about here, experiential type therapies. So IFS, AEDP, somatic experiencing, coherence therapy is one of them. I've even seen hypnosis or NLP put under that category, emotionally focused therapy. I know I'm missing a bunch of others.
There's many. There's
many. But coherence therapy is particularly useful as an example because it very explicitly goes through the process of like this lighting up this old neural learning, this neural network, and then having this contradictory neural network also light up at the same time in a very word-based way. So you can actually see what happens when this does that. So I'll be sure to link to that in the video and podcast description so people can look at that. So, but how now, obviously one of our recommendations today is going to be, here are some of the things that you can do to find a therapist who knows how to do this kind of work.
No.
But let's just say someone wants to get started and is like, okay, I understand the principles. I understand what I'm doing here is I'm trying to work on the neural networks that are responding to my symptoms and that are interpreting the symptoms in a certain way or responding to other aspects of my life that's making me feel really stressed out and that's lighting up my nervous system and making my symptoms worse. So once people have a sense of what some of those things may be, what are some of the things they can do to start making this process happen? Are there things that they can do on their own?
You know, I get that question quite a bit. And I don't know if it has a super simple answer because I've seen it go really well. I've seen it go poorly. There probably is even some danger to warn people about of trying to tap into their unconscious mind alone. And that
Right.
depends on how complex your trauma is and blah, blah, blah.
For sure.
On the other hand, I wouldn't say you only have to do this with a therapist because it's just learning about yourself, self-exploration. That should, like, we have all the right to slow down, be curious about our inner world and begin to relate to it more compassionately and blah, blah, blah. And even bring some tools to that. So it really is, you might just gently try. And, I think that's one of the reasons why IFS is becoming popular is because it lends itself well to self-help, probably more than coherence therapy does. So that's why I often lead with that as a model. It's just harder to find a coherence therapist because there's less of us. But so, and there's a great book called Self Therapy, where you
By
teach,
Earley.
yeah,
Yep.
you can learn how to do parts work on your own, basically. And that's
And
kind
I'll
of like,
put the link to
I'm
that
sure
to that
yeah,
in the video description too.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm sure there's other things the more you learn about the mind, you can find your own creative ways to kind of I do kind of coherence therapy on myself, obviously, when I'm a coherence therapist, but and it just could be as simple as slowing down, go back to that moment where that thing happened, and just okay, right before then, slow down. What did again, you use the word prediction. It's all predictions. Okay, what was I predicting? And just okay. And I think I like the coherence version of making that into an overt statement. I think our brain also does language really well, not analytic, complex, super complex language, but as what's called limbic language, where you just kind of get to write the emotional core of the thing. Like, I'm about to die, or I better be perfect, or if it really captures what the limbic system knows, it'll let us know, yes, that's it. That's the language. So I think that's useful. Even the other day I was like, why do I have this weird feeling? And I just started making overt statements and really trying to get at it and type it out and be this is what my brain predicts. It just knows to expect this badness, and so I'm feeling bad, and so, it's probably worth learning to see what system works best for you. Try parts work if you think you're more visual or somatic, or okay, this is tension, and just ask okay, you could say, what is it telling me? What does it know? What danger am I predicting here? If it helps you stabilize it by writing out that danger, oh, whenever this happens, this is about to happen next.
And that's a good point because often the first thing people will say if they're dealing with physical symptoms is, I'm afraid this is going to make the symptoms worse. Okay, fair enough. But what would that mean? So if the symptoms got worse, besides you feeling physically uncomfortable, what else does that mean? I think that's a good thing to ask.
It is interesting. It's often what's under this, what's under this, what's under this. Okay, so what, like you said, okay, what if what specific suffering are you, why is that so? I mean, it's hard to say why is that so bad if it's already kind of a bad thing. I'll be angry. What did you learn about anger that makes anger so dangerous, though? And kind of really digging to really see what specific suffering, and it's probably one that I experienced, if I'm predicting it so much.
Right.
Right.
Right. So if it's okay, I just want to give some examples of things that I've seen. So,
Yeah.
because again, everyone that I work with, they're pretty much the first answer is, yeah, well, I'm gonna feel symptoms and I'm gonna feel really miserable.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And you're right.
Yeah.
Remember, the theme of this entire conversation is coherence. You make sense. Nothing about your predictions are incorrect or don't make sense. Okay. So, okay. And if you feel miserable, again, what does that mean? Or what exactly does miserable mean? What does that look like? What comes to mind when you say the word? Again, there's lots of different ways to ask this question, but what will often come out from people is stuff like, I will be incapacitated and I will be useless. I yeah. Or I'm a terrible parent. I'm letting my whole family down. I
Wow.
uh, I'm I feel a ton of guilt and shame because I should be better than this by now. It's, or everyone else is doing better than I am. There are comparisons that come up.
Mm.
Um, I see some folks who just are just they have a lot of fear of fear itself. Like
Yeah.
they can't tolerate fear. That I see that a lot with uh, people who've had diagnoses of OCD in particular,
Yeah.
obsessive compulsive disorder, for
Sure.
anyone who doesn't know that
Mm.
term, which I'm sure no everyone does. But
Yeah.
I see a lot of like there's like a suspicion like I can't have fear because if I have fear, then I'm going to immediately become overwhelmed and everything is going to become terrible and I'm going to melt down and just become completely incapacitated and go to a mental hospital. I've actually had people say this to me when, I mean, so they've learned somewhere along the line that it made sense to view fear that way or to respond to fear that way. So just giving some examples for people in case they're wondering what deeper things might be underneath fear of symptoms.
Yes. Yes. Uh,
Knowing fear of symptoms makes sense. It
yep.
makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So before we go on to some of the recommendations you might have about how to find a therapist who knows how to do this kind of work, I just want to say another tool that we use in our work with neural circuit issues is something called somatic tracking. And I think it's memory reconsolidation in action, although I've never heard anyone else describe it that way.
Mhm.
You heard it first, folks. No, I'm kidding.
Mhm, mhm.
But what somatic tracking is the process of allowing a symptom and tracking it mindfully
Yes.
in a neutral way rather than a fearful way, like
That
responding right there you go. And so you're juxtaposing this experience of neutrality or curiosity or even a positive experience with this previously feared symptom. What you're ending up doing is you're lighting up the circuits around the symptom, so the electricity is in that circuit as you described, Tori, and then at the same time you have it like you have this other experience that distinctly contradicts your prior experiences with it. So I
huge.
think that's what we're accomplishing with somatic tracking and why it's so effective.
That is absolutely makes sense. That absolutely makes sense and is exactly tracks with so many examples I've heard of other kinds of symptoms. Like I was just listening to Bruce thing on trauma where someone was absolutely terrified of remembering a particular trauma memory that was like semi-repressed, but they knew it was right there. And anyway, they were just terrified it would like you said, it's going to take me under, it's going to drive me nuts, it's going to break me, I'm just going to be wailing for days. I mean, it's just like, because they had some suffering if I go there. And so they purposely kind of went there, to see like, okay, is that, and there's this beautiful moment where Bruce says, is this as bad as you would have predicted?
Exactly.
And she said, no, it's not as bad as I would have as I thought it would be. I think she said that, was this as bad as you thought it would be? I mean, yes, it was
Mhm.
horrible. Like she did actually have this horrible memory of
Of
sexual
course.
assault. It was
Yes.
horrible. And it felt
Yes.
bad, it felt icky, and it was, ugh. He was like, as horrible as this is this as bad as you thought it would be? And she goes, no. And then you could just see, she goes, oh my God, this calm just went over my whole body.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was like, I'm so calm. I cannot, that was like magic. What just happened? She's like, it
Yes.
was just a mismatch of like, yes, it was horrible to remember, but she thought she'd be like driven crazy by it. And you know what I mean? It would like break, like the horrible, like in our imagination's always worse, right? So, so like she thought it'd be, and then it was so cool because then this fear of being in bathrooms had, is what brought her in because that's where the trauma happened. And that just went away.
Right.
It
Wow.
just in that moment, you could just see like,
Shocking.
yeah, I thought that was so intuitive of Bruce, right? He knew exactly when to time, like, is this is best? But it's kind of reminds you were talking about. It's like, let's do this and show it and just hold it in a way where it's like, okay, this sucks. Let it suck. It's fine. It sucks. And it is doable. It's not
Exactly.
killing you. And that's a huge disconfirmation. That's going to at least take some of the
Exactly.
fear off. There may be more work after that to like understand other layers. There's usually layers of schemas and stuff. But that's going to, and by the way, that then having that layer taken care of can then make everything feel safe enough to go the next step.
Bingo. Exactly. Oh, I'm so excited that I finally got to talk to you about this. Oh, I get to tell you about somatic tracking.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's great. I love it. You said you're maybe going to join our group with Bruce next
Yes.
week.
Oh, I'd
It was
love
great. I did
to.
ask him before meeting with you. I was like, what do you know like about this? And so anyway, but
Oh, I would love to because we need our fields are right now
yeah.
like operating on parallel paths and they need to converge
Yeah,
because
yeah.
so many of the things, so we have these treatment methods. One of them is called emotional awareness and expression therapy, and it's exactly what it sounds like, but it's disconfirming emotional experiences. It's you have anger and it is met with compassion and allowing rather than whatever the feared consequence would be. We're doing memory reconsolidation in all of
Absolutely.
our work. It's just no one's calling it that. So
Good.
we
You
will
are
we
not
will
knowing
discuss.
anymore. You are.
We will continue to talk about this. All right. So people who are watching this are now hopefully as enthusiastic as we are, or maybe 50% as enthusiastic as we are about memory reconsolidation and experiential therapy specifically as a pathway to bring this on and to help resolve mental health symptoms, but also physical symptoms from my experience, also physical symptoms. So one of the issues that I've run into is that I run into trouble when I'm recommending a specific modality. Like if I say, oh, just find an IFS therapist or find an AEDP therapist, they end up going and doing talk therapy. And it's not that talk therapy is bad or not useful, but for this particular purpose, we want people to do experiential work. So what recommendations do you have for people on how to find a therapist who can do this well?
I mean, that you may know actually just as much as I do what to recommend for that. Um, I mean, if you really want to take matters into your hands, you might learn about the few main core options to see which will be a better match for you. So I have a series on
Mhm.
my YouTube channel on AEDP, one on IFS and one coherence therapy. But there's, like you said, there's somatic forms of work.
EMDR too. I forgot to mention that.
EMDR. I mean,
Yeah.
and probably
Mhm.
someone should have met one specific for this. I mean, it'd be interesting maybe there already are things for this, but so you can kind of see if one fits you best. But ultimately, what matters probably more than approach is just finding a good therapist. Because no matter, it's not just the technique being
Mhm.
brilliant. You have to have
Mhm.
a good therapist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's also kind of the hardest part. It is possible though, but if people don't realize that's a little bit hard, they'll just be like, "What the heck?" You know what I mean? Like, but if you normalize, yeah, you might have to try a few therapists. Like, and it's like dating. I mean, it's like worth it. Like, you don't just take the first partner. Like, this is a kind of a partner for you. Like, that is going to see you through some things and like do this big journey with you. Like, I know it's a pain, but it's just like anything. Like, you might have to be with four of them, or like really research or ask for. I mean, you're more likely to hit gold if you ask for referrals in
Of
your
course.
area. Begin to like ask around, like who does deep work, experiential work in my state. It doesn't even have to be in your area. There are some people doing coaching now that helps it broaden to the national a little bit more. But
Oh, and I know like licensing, there's some kind of big change coming where people are going to be able to practice across state lines at some point, hopefully. As
hopefully,
yes, so I know there's some of that going on behind
there's
the
some of
scenes,
that already
working on
going
that.
on, and I don't know if there's what to expect
Right.
next, but sometimes you can a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I in the future, I'd like to actually build a big network of therapists to help people find them. But I have a whole project lined up for next year. But in the meantime, it's kind of frustrating because I don't know where to send people right away. But especially if they have to use their insurance, so it's a little bit complicated.
Right.
But I've known plenty of people, even sometimes on insurance, that if they just do the digging, use their networks, ask for referrals, talk to one person, ask who else does this even better than you.
So now that I found you, can you tell me someone who's better than you? Great.
I know, but you can exactly say that. But but I mean, honestly, you could say, look, I really need somebody who's your teacher. You know what I mean? Like, really, I mean, you have to like find out a little bit,
Right.
like, who
Right.
is going to
Right.
speak to be good for this? Because you say, I just know this is not a normal, like this is not just talk therapy. It's not going to be enough.
Right. Right. Okay.
Um,
So I'm wondering, is there some clue that people might have in regards to the kinds of questions a therapist might ask or how a therapist might act or what a therapist might focus on in that first 15-minute consultation that
I
might
mean,
let
first
them
of all,
know this person's
yeah.
more experiential than
Yeah, I
talk?
mean, first of all, get someone who is experiential, that just says they're experiential, that either does one of these modes probably. Pick a
Mhm,
mode, I mean, or don't worry about the mode, just any of the ones that you've listed would be great.
mhm.
Somatic, motion focus, like ADP or ISTP or IFS,
ISTDP, it's another one. Yep, yep,
another one,
yep, yep.
so you find one and it doesn't really matter probably which type, as long as it's one of the experiential types. And then, meet with them and see, do they really help deepen things, help you feel safe? Because that's going to be important. And then are they clearly focused in a way that they're not giving you too much leeway to just story tell? I mean, that's a big thing that most therapists run into that kind of, for me, separates like mediocre therapists from good therapists. It's like if you end up taking a lot of the time to storytell, that takes, I mean, it is hard as a therapist to stop a client from doing that and to say, hey, come back. We were talking about this. And like, let's focus it in. I'm going to guide you in this whole process. And I'm very involved and I'm active. It's easier for the therapist just to sit back. And a lot of people actually have training to do that don't work experientially. All experiential therapists should be very engaged. So if they're not very engaged, if they're just kind of like letting you take over the session, they're probably not very like confident in being an experiential therapist. So that might be the safety, and are they engaged and working things and understanding things and guiding you would probably
Yeah. There's a what you're describing really is like a sense of attunement, like, or an attempt at least to be attuned to you and track you and follow you, not just listen to your story, like in it
passively and nod, and yeah,
passively. Yeah,
kind
or
of have compassion, which is nice. It's nice to
right.
be
Totally.
understood,
Yeah.
like what you're suffering, but understood with what you're suffering is one level, but like why? Like, okay, so we got it. Now let's go in.
Right.
It could be like, let's look back at a moment. Let's look at an example. It could be, let's start with a part and where's that live in your body? But there's some way to begin to track internally and ask the deeper mind to speak about this. And it is not easy to do that as a therapist. I would say there's a small percent of therapists that can do that, honestly, but they're
Yeah.
out there.
Yes. And as you said, unfortunately, also the way people are trained before they leave school is often in more cognitive behavioral
Or
methods.
PCBD. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
they, not to say that that's
Bad.
again not useful. It's super useful, but it's not necessarily what that person's been trained to do early in
Yeah.
his or her career. So it would need to be someone who's done additional training in these
Yeah.
modalities. Yeah. Okay. This was just so helpful and so wonderful. And I could talk to you for hours about this. I
Yeah.
really could. But I think we did a good job.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
I think we covered a lot of ground and we gave people the real basics, like how
Yeah.
this stuff works. So I hope everyone who's listening has some good takeaways here. And I have a lot of information I'm going to put in the video description and the podcast description. So be sure to, if you're on YouTube, just click more under the title. That'll show you all the things that I have there. I'll have links to all sorts of different therapy modalities, and I'll have links to your website, Tori, and I'll have links to your amazing YouTube channel and that video I referenced and all this other stuff. So everyone be sure to look at that because you'll really want these additional resources for yourself. And Tori, I cannot thank you enough. I told you when we were off air that I was starstruck to have you on my channel, and I'm still starstruck, and I'm so excited that we got to talk. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's delightful.
Thank you. All right. So everyone, please leave a comment or a question that lets me know what you thought of this episode. If you have any thoughts on what we should talk about next, or you have any questions on what we covered, I'd love to hear them. You can also like the video, you can share it, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can follow the podcast. All of these things help us reach more people. And thank you guys again so much for being here. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.